Good morning, everyone. We're so excited to be here. My name is Victoria, and I am a Watershed Conservation Coordinator with the RCD, and I work in a few different watersheds, but mainly the Alhambra Creek watershed and the Marsh Creek watershed. And today we are going to talk about all of the recent and current restoration in the Marsh Creek watershed. So first, I want to just talk a little bit about what is the Marsh Creek watershed, and it is actually our second largest watershed in the county, and it starts on the east side of Mount Diablo and follows the main creek of Marsh Creek all the way down into the delta, and it exits very close to Big Break, but actually within the Dutch Slough project that you will be hearing about soon. And as you can see, there is a very large elevation change in the watershed. And the entire area of the watershed is about 60 acres with about 167 total miles of channel length. And the longest branch of channel is about 35 miles. There's a lot of different groups of people in the watershed, but the cities that it includes is Brentwood, Oakley, parts of Antioch, and then there's a lot of unincorporated private landowners in the upper watershed. And in the watershed atlas that was created by the county in 2003, there is an estimated amount of 38,500 people in the watershed, but more recently, the Brentwood population is about 65,000, the Oakley population about 44,000, and the Antioch population about 115,000. So you can see that there's quite a lot of people within or very close to the watershed that might be impacted by or impact the watershed. And there are two community groups in this watershed that are focused on the watershed and creek health, the first being the Friends of Marsh Creek Watershed, and they were established in 2004 and received their 501c3 status in 2010. And currently they mainly focus on hands in the dirt, volunteer projects. So a lot of native plantings, invasive removals, and creek cleanups. And the other group is the Marsh Creek Watershed Council, who started meeting about a year ago and is really a forum or a place for different people working in or living in or just interested in the watershed to come together, share ideas, share information, and get advice. And so this group is still in its forming phases and is currently working on creating their mission, vision, values, and goals, and so far has finalized their mission statement and vision statement, which you can see on the screen now. And now I'm going to pass it to John Cain, who is the Sacramento Valley Senior Conservation Director with River Partners. And he's going to talk a little bit about the guiding notion in recent restoration in the watershed and the Dutch Slough restoration project.
Thank you, Victoria. I've been working in the watershed since about 1998 when I worked for a group called the Natural Heritage Institute. And one of the first things we did with funding from the Costa Conservancy is put together a report about the Marsh Creek watershed that in not only was descriptive about how the watershed used to be and how it's changed, but also laid out somewhat of a plan for the watershed. And it's exciting to me that two of the people that participated in that, along with me, are still very involved in Marsh Creek. And one of the persons that was very instrumental in getting this all together, kind of just introducing our group to the watershed was Steve Barbata of a group called the Delta Science Center, which eventually morphed into the Science Center at Big Break. So we put together this report, and you can find it on the web, on the internet, by Googling the past and present condition of the Marsh Creek watershed. And there's a link here to that. Next slide. So one of the first things we had to do was come up with a boundary, and it actually was quite a bit of work to come up with this boundary. This map's a little bit out of date. Fortunately, there's more green space on the map. But one way it differs from the map that the Contra Costa Watershed Atlas developed is it's got this big right bulge. And you might be saying, well, how does the creek flow over there? Next slide, please. So if you look at the image in the middle, that is the channel planform, and these are all graphics that are in the report, of Marsh Creek in 1914. And it didn't just have one channel. It was a braided channel system, very common of ephemeral creek systems. And there were a couple of large floods in 1955 and 58. And that led to the channelization, or as the Soil Conservation Service described it as at the time, the improvement of Marsh Creek. So that it was not a headache to farmers and neighbors when it flooded. But you can see that channel to the right would just kind of flood off into the big right bulge. So we sort of thought, well, we should think about what was the watershed like historically when we drew the boundary. And over the left is a picture of a reach of the creek in the city of Brentwood at the end of the last, I think that was roughly in 2018, 2017, before the construction of the Three Creeks project. Pretty dismal. And it's really, the water quality visually has gotten worse over the years from when I got started in around 2000. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we recognized at the time, and these maps are from 2003, the one on the right just shows the urban areas or urbanizing areas, and the one on the left shows the growth over time. And you can see that in 1914, Oakley and Brentwood were just little hamlets, but over time there was a lot of growth, and it really picked up in around 1994. The 90s is when it really picked up, and of course it's grown a lot since then. In 2003, you heard from Victoria, the population of the watershed was about 38,000. My rough estimate is it's at least 110,000, so almost a threefold increase. What we could see at the time, and miraculously it's still true, is that there are some open space areas that along the creek, this urbanized reach, that could still be restored. And you can see them on the photo on the right, graphic on the right, with the little green areas through the gray. Next slide. And this just gives you an example of, the potential to change the creek from I love to make fun of the engineers from the 1960s, that this was what they called an improvement. Now we're working on restoration, and this is a picture from the Laurel Avenue Bridge in Oakley, looking downstream at the unrestored reach and upstream at the restored reach. We're going to hear more about Creekside Park from Sarah Puckett later on today. Next slide. So one of the great things we did, it wasn't our idea, it was a graduate student at the University of California, Berkeley, is we did a survey of the residents of Brentwood that lived within a quarter mile of the creek in about 2002 or so. And the city of Brentwood Parks Department kindly put with $5,000 to do this. And I know it's hard to read, but can you see my cursor? Probably not. Okay, so on the left graph, the bars that score highest for problems in Marsh Creek, one of them is dumping and garbage, and immediately behind that is not enough shade. and all of the other concerns are somewhere below that. And then on the graph on the right, desired changes or improvements to Marsh Creek. And there were, there was a category called other, there are a whole bunch of different things. And then the one that scored highest by far was vegetation. And then, well, trails and facilities scored well too, but vegetation scored very, very high. So next slide. Could you go to the next slide for us? Should I put this out of order? Oops, I guess I missed this slide. Go back, please. Yeah, so the vision for Marsh Creek, and it's kind of grown over time, is can we create a shaded corridor from the Delta to Mount Diablo? And Ben Weise at the RCD put this map together, and the little green segments are places where we actually have done the restoration project to create a shaded corridor. There's one here at Creekside Park. There's a big one at Dutch Slough at the bottom of the system. And so we're going to hear about these 4 projects, but the vision really is maybe it's possible someday to create a shaded corridor all the way from the Delta to Mount Diablo. Next slide. So I really was reluctant to make a map, make a list of partners, because I know I've left some off. For example, I left off the Contra Costa, the Marsh Creek Watershed Forum, a new group, but there were just so many people that got involved in this project. And when you get involved in the project, it didn't necessarily mean it was easy. Some of these partnerships were really challenging to figure out how to reconcile the mission of the flood control district with restoration, but people stuck with it. And we have this really great photo with Victoria and Chris Lim kind of in front on a day we took visiting the Dutch Slough project, which I'm about to talk about. You're going to hear about a number of projects on the creek, and I'm going to start by talking about the Dutch Slough project at the bottom of the creek. Next slide. So yeah, the 4 projects you're going to hear about is the Dutch Slough project, Creekside Park at Oakley, the Three Creeks Parkway in Brentwood, and the Marsh Creek State Park project. I wanted to say that in addition to these projects, there was also a fish ladder that American Rivers got built in around, I want to say 2009, 2010. And one project that we don't really hear about, but in the 1970s, 1980s, when the city of Brentwood was expanding, Sean Dainty used to own, former owner of the Dainty Center Nursery School, was a city council member, and he insisted on doing basically the same thing that we've done elsewhere, creating a nice parkway just downstream of Balfour in Brentwood. And that really is a model for what we've done elsewhere. And it's just great that he had that foresight. Next slide. So the Dutch Slough project's here at the mouth of Marsh Creek. And I want to just highlight that I'm going to tell you all about Dutch Slough, but before I don't want to forget, we're going to have Dutch Slough Day on June 3rd. And the site's going to be open from 10 to 2. We're going to have some scientists there from UC Berkeley, USGS to tell us about the research there. And most importantly, you'll just get an opportunity to come and visit the site and look around. And we'll be, if you want to know more, please email me. But we'll be trying to get publicity out about it, and with more details on the program. Next slide. So there are 3 parcels on the Dutch Slough project that we worked with the landowners to purchase, and the Department of Water Resources, with funding from the CalFed Bay Delta program and the Coastal Currency, purchased 3 parcels, 1,200 acres in 2002 for $27 million. And the Emerson parcel, the parcel on the right, was the last operating dairy in Contra Costa County. Next slide. There are 3 goals for the project: provide shoreline access, educational and recreation opportunities, restoration of fish and wildlife, and research to really improve the science of ecosystem restoration in the context of what we call adaptive management. Next slide. The project was actually designed with an experimental design to test a couple of key variables. How high did the elevation of the marsh plain need to be? And how big did the watershed or the marsh drainage size need to be to maximize benefits? So it's a little bit difficult to explain with this graphic, but one thing about this site and other sites in the Delta is that they're subsided below sea level. So we couldn't restore the whole site because some of the areas are below sea level. And what we actually did, if Victoria can help me out, excavated from an area on the Emerson parcel, now the open water area, kind of up at the north, a little bit farther up there, the gray area there, Victoria. That area there was excavated. That's a big water area that boaters can access. And we use the borrow from that area to maximize the amount of tidal marsh on the site. Next slide. It required a lot of site grading, and the picture of the left is me with some of the men. It wasn't just men that helped get this project off the ground, but when it came time to stand next to the big heavy grading equipment, only the men showed up. So that's the picture we have at the groundbreaking ceremony. And there was like at least a dozen of these things moving around. It was a massive excavation effort, moved 2 million cubic yards of soil to maximize the amount of area that's suitable for tidal marsh elevation. Next slide. Here we're seeing where what we see in the main picture here is where the breach is being made to allow tidewaters into the site. So the entire site was inundated. The levees were kept in place. It was inundated in a managed way. Tules were growing. And then only after the tules and other wetland vegetation were established, the levee was breached to allow water into the channels that had been excavated. And so we see the levee breach being constructed in the big picture on the right. And then on the little picture bottom left, we see a bridge being installed. So there's a really trail system that allows you to walk over this large breach. It has a lot of water that comes in and out on the tides. Next slide. Of course, there's all kinds of revegetation. My group, River Partners, did the revegetation of the site. Here's Molly from DWR. She's a plant lover, as you can see, standing next to a sycamore that was only planted a couple of years before this picture was taken. And on the bottom right, we have a picture of the Antioch Dune primrose that grows on the site. Next. And we have this great research program with USGS studying the evolution of tidal marsh, UC Berkeley, Dennis Baldacchi's lab studying carbon sequestration. And the amazing thing is Dennis Baldacchi's grew up across the street from Dutch Slough, and his father was the NRCS field office manager when it was called the Soil Conservation Service. So deep roots with the RCD. We have this super, super cool DNA research happening, which I'll show you in a second. And then UC Davis is doing vertebrate, Museum of Vertebrate Zoology is doing surveys of fish and wildlife out there. And the results have started to come in. It's premature they're not peer reviewed, they're not published. It's premature to get too excited about them. But I was on a field trip 2 weeks ago with a group of agency leaders, federal and state agencies, and the scientists were there, and they reported that when it comes to carbon sequestration, Dutch slough, after only a year, is in the top 1 percentile of all ecosystems on Earth. Amazing statistic. They were very excited about that. It could plateau, could level off. That was just dumb luck. Won't take any credit for that. UC Davis reports that it has the highest taxa diversity of any restoration or natural site in the Delta after 1 year. And they attribute it to the design and the mosaic of habitat types. And then USGS just raved about the decision to plant tules ahead of time, and that's the driver and why carbon sequestration is so much better. Tidal marsh evolution is so much more rapid on this site than other sites they measure. Next slide. So this is this boat that has a net on the front, drive up that tidal channel I was showing you as the tide's coming out, and it funnels all of the fish underneath the boat in a channel that's sort of shown on the top right. And they go through a little chamber with a camera, and every 5 minutes they collect DNA samples of what's coming through there. And the guy explained on a field trip that I was on, you know, I used to try to explain this to people, and nobody, not even my mom, knew what I was talking about. But now that we have a COVID pandemic, I just say, you know, that thing you put up your nose to see if you have COVID, this houseboat's the same thing, using the identical technology. Next slide. So I left out a slide that showed the trail plan, but I want to introduce Cain Strelo, the planning manager at the city of Oakley. He has been working with Oakley since 2006, and he reports that planning is mostly about new residential subdivisions and commercial developments and overseeing planning projects like the housing element. But this is an exciting thing that the city of Oakley is doing, and Ken was very nice to come and brief us on this. One of the goals, as I said, of the public access of Dutch slough was public access. And so the project includes a 55-acre site that was deeded to the city for a community park, as well as trails around the Emerson parcel and over that really great bridge I showed you. And so Ken's going to tell us a little bit about the Oakley Regional Park Master Plan. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody, and good morning. My name is Ken Strelo, Planning Manager with the City of Oakley. Yeah, so the Oakley Regional Park. This is an approximately 55-acre site. You saw it on some of the slides that John was showing us, and it's at the northern end of Sellers Avenue. It's north of the Contra Costa Water District's underground canal, and it's adjacent and surrounded on 3 sides by the Dutch slough tidal marsh wetland restoration project. The land was received by the city after the Emerson, Gilbert, and Burroughs families sold their properties north of the canal, which was eventually obtained by DWR. And then DWR and the city entered into an MOU, which was executed in January of 2004. And as part of that MOU, there were several entitlements for the landowners south of the canal. Those had to all take place and be finalized, and then the city would eventually be deeded that park land or future park land. Prior to the sale of the properties that make up the park and the project that John was talking about, that area was part of 3,500 unit, meaning single family residential homes or residences, unit development that included another 100 acres dedicated to the city. So as part of that deal, the property owners made with other entities and eventually obtaining that property, it basically preserved all that land north of the canal. So that was a big step in all of that. Next slide, please, Victoria. And this is the existing future park site. It was part of the Emerson Dairy and part of the Gilbert property here in the foreground. You can see the kind of buffer between The site and the homes to the left, that's the underground canal project. And then most of the homes to the left are in the Emerson Ranch subdivision. And at the very top of the picture is the Cypress Grove subdivision, and you can see sort of a blank area up there. That's the middle and elementary schools, if you're familiar with that area off of East Cypress Road. Next slide, please. So this shows sort of the overall vicinity. The yellow being the future park area, the blue being the restoration project John covered, and then other development around the area. So the concept on this park has been happening for several years. It's been in conceptual designs over different city council, makeups of the city council. There have been several work sessions, hearings, workshops, etc., that have gone through many different ideas. We've had different concepts come forward. Some of you who may be more familiar with the background on this park may remember discussions on potential polo grounds out there. We've had all sorts of suitors come trying to pitch their ideas for what would be best for the park. But most recently, there was a master plan done in 2019, and I'll get to that in, I think, a slide or two, but since then, the city continues to grow. There's another new council, or at least new members of the council. And so we are in a 7-phase program right now for kind of trying to get to a final master plan for the park. Because it will be an expensive park. We need to get that plan in place so we can start pursuing funding. And I'll get through that in a minute as well. Next slide, please. So this was the park, or the concept that was done in 2019. I'm not going to go over everything on here, but some of the kind of big items are the baseball/soccer fields, perimeter trails that help match up with the restoration project and the levee trail system out there, a community garden, lacrosse field, which I think would kind of overlap that center area, agricultural fields over there on the right side, destination playgrounds, and a pavilion. Also, one of the key elements of the park then, and hopefully in the future, will be access to Dutch slough for non-motorized watercraft like kayaks and canoes. Next slide, please. We are currently in phase 4 of the current process, and that is analysis of the inputs in the online survey report, and then eventually presenting that to the city council. So the other phases that you see on here, I'm going to go over those quickly, just to kind of give you a time frame of when they happen and what's in the coming in the future. So phase 1 was a community meeting that was held on March 29th of this year. And then an online survey was opened up, and that was open from March 30th to April 19th. City received all of those results, and analysis of those results took place from April 20th to April 30th. We're in the current phase now, where staff will be presenting to City Council. As this thing says, it may happen this month. If it doesn't happen this month, or if it did happen this month, I guess it would be May. Looking at my calendar, May 23rd would be the council date that happens. If it doesn't happen in May, it would be June 13th, and then the next date would be July 11th. So that presenting to council, actually the presenting to council is estimated to happen in July. The draft master plan, and again, these are the dates in the future, so these are still ETAs, probably sometime in September, and this is all in 2023. Then the final master plan potentially in October of this year. The city will depending on how this master plan looks, the city will have to do, additional environmental analysis and everything like that. The Dutch Slough Tidal Marsh Wetland Restoration Project did include the park as a concept, and then I think phase 1, the parking lot or something, I don't remember exactly, in the EIR. But what the city will be doing, we'll probably be getting into more detail, and we'll need to do a little more work on that side of things. So No one should be concerned there. There will be additional analysis done through CCWF. Next slide, please. And this is the project website. So Oakley, as we grow as a city, we are growing. We're nearing 50,000 population now. We've always had a pretty tight staffing here especially for development services and admin. So we wear many hats. But as we grow, we bring in new talent and new people and new ideas. And one of the more recent things that we've done is this Engage Oakley. And it's allowed for sort of an online method of engaging people in the community, seeking input from folks that may not enjoy the more conventional way of showing up to a meeting and putting in a speaker card. But it's also not just relying on, random threads that may happen out there on the different social media websites. So it's a little more organized, allows for people to be engaged online. And this is the website where you can find the materials that I covered. There's also a short video on there, kind of, showing some things. And every once in a while, we'll have a narration on there, whatever the current phase is. So I encourage you to go there. You can also reach me. Again, my name is Ken Strelo. My last name is Strelo. And you can look me up on the City of Oakley website, give me a call or an email at your convenience. And I'm happy to either talk to you about this project or get you in touch with our public works. That concludes my presentation, and I will now be introducing Sarah Puckett. And Sarah Puckett is with the American Rivers and is the interim Central Valley Program Director. She has been working to restore Marsh Creek for over 20 years. That's a very long time. That's a lot of restoration work. She will be talking about the 2 restoration projects mentioned earlier in the presentation as we continue to move up the watershed on this tour of the Marsh Creek watershed. Those 2 projects will be the Oakley Creekside Park located in Oakley, California, and the 3 Creeks project in Brentwood, California. I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ken. Ken mentioned I'm with American Rivers, and for those of you who don't know, we're a national nonprofit organization that protects and restores all rivers across the country, from remote mountain streams to highly urbanized creeks and rivers in the cities, for both people and nature. And we believe everyone deserves access to a clean and healthy river. Oh, whoops, your next slide, please, Victoria. Thanks. Just before I begin, every slide that I'm about to show would not have happened without all the partners on the slides and some partners that are not on the slide, including Earth Team, the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District, and the Marsh Creek Watershed Council. Hold on, I knew my dog would want to go out right when I started. So just none of us could have done this alone, and everything that I'm going to be talking about was done in just real close partnership with multiple partners. Next slide, please. All right, just a quick overview. I know John showed a map earlier. This map, I love this map. This is from the Bay Nature article that was done on the Marsh Creek Regional Trail. If you have a chance to check it out, it's a great article, and it talks about all the projects along the Marsh Creek Trail. The top star here is the Oakley Creekside Park project, fairly close to Dutch Slough. And then the fish ladder is right in between the 2 yellow stars. And then the star down below is as the 3 Creeks project in the heart of the city of Brentwood. Next slide, please. All right, so John talked a little bit about the Soil Conservation Service, and just Marsh Creek operates as both a flood control channel and a creek. And the Soil Conservation Service in the 1950s and 60s improved the channel, straightened it, and put it in a straight trapezoidal flood control channel. and removed all the vegetation. So it's a very fast, efficient way to get all the floodwaters out to the delta as fast as possible and away from the people and the farms. So the channel's designed to hold a certain flood capacity, which we call the 100-year flow, and no more and no less. So if you plant trees in an already full flood channel, it'll cause major flooding. So any design for restoration that's done along Marsh Creek needs to increase the capacity of the channel. So you can see here below, this is what we mean by a restored channel. You have to physically excavate the banks on either side and widen the channel. So you actually have the same amount of flood capacity in the channel with all the trees in there. And every project, the Marsh Creek is owned by the Contra Costa County Flood Control District. So we work in really close partnership with them to make sure that any design on the channel does not increase flooding and hopefully improves the flood capacity in the channel. Next slide, please. All right, so now you can see this in real life. This is the trapezoidal flood control channel of Marsh Creek. This is in the city of Oakley. We're standing on the Laurel Road Bridge. This is back in 2007, looking upstream, which is south. And you can see the Marsh Creek Trail on the left-hand side, very regional trail that connects, and it's currently growing. Hopefully, is going to be connecting up to Mount Diablo State Park, and at some point soon. And then you can see here that the older houses back in the day were turned away from the creek with a big fence along the trail. And you can tell that the creek was not considered an amenity back in this day, and that the people didn't have immediate access to the trail. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a big opportunity. This parcel of land, undeveloped, it's owned by the city of Oakley, and they wanted to build a big park in this location. So this is one of those areas that we identified on that green map back in the Marsh Creek Watershed Plan. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the city of Oakley was the project lead on this project. They received a grant and from oh my gosh, I can't remember who it was, big state grant, and excavated this channel. So this was done in partnership and conjunction with the design of the city park in 2012. You can see the channel being widened and the creation of a floodplain. And the next slide. And then 2 years later, these are teenage trees. You can see they're just starting to grow, and the creation of a shady corridor is being created. And then today, let's see, next slide, please. It's hard to even take an after picture because the vegetation is pretty dense in this area. You can see the great blue heron using the creek. There's also 2 beaver dams that have been created on the creek, and they're just loving the cottonwood trees, and just the amount of life that is now at this park is pretty amazing. I was talking to a gentleman who lives probably right like where I'm standing on the corner house, and he says that he can hear the tail of the beaver slapping on the water from his bedroom, and he and his son go out every day and walk around the park and look for birds and fish and try to find the beaver. So this is phase 1. If you can go to next slide. So actually, let's start with the slide on the right here. You can see the upper portion of this vacant land that's on the left in 2007 with the old, channelized creek on the left, and then the newly restored. Victoria, if you wouldn't mind just showing that large area that has been expanded up above. Right here. Yeah, this whole area is where the creek has been widened as part of the Oakley Creekside Park. And now people can access, you know, when they're at the park, they can go down and visit the creek and walk around on the trails down there. And then there's a pedestrian bridge that connects right there, thank you, that connects the Marsh Creek Regional Trail to Oakley Creekside Park. So the upstream of that, downstream of the pedestrian bridge has all been restored. And now we're working closely with the city of Oakley to do the same thing on the undeveloped portion, on the upstream portion right there. And if you can go to the next slide, please. This is the pedestrian bridge. That is looking downstream at the restored section. And then if you go to the next slide, please. Now we're standing on the pedestrian bridge looking upstream. This is what the site looks like today. And you can see, again, an undeveloped portion. This is privately owned, and it's going to be scheduled to be developed by a private developer. And if you can go to the next slide, please. You can see this development has been approved, and we worked really closely, and the city and the developer and the flood control district worked closely to try to push the development and the bright green water quality detention basins or bioretention facilities away from the creek in order to give the creek more room in order to expand the channel. So this is approved and going to be developed soon. And then we are working closely with the flood control district and getting 65% designs have already been completed on this whole section, and we're just waiting for the green light from the flood control district in order to move forward with applying for implementation funds. All right, so that is Oakley Creekside Park. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And then upstream, we're going to be talking about the Three Creeks project, which is in the city of Brentwood. This is a longer, more linear restoration project. It's about 4,000 linear feet, right in the heart of downtown Brentwood. Brentwood's just a mile away from here, and you can walk along a new trail to access this part of the creek. And I just wanted to point out that there's all these little green, there are these green areas like Sun Gold Park, New City Park, and this was no coincidence that all these parks are located along Marsh Creek. This was after years of work with the city, with the Friends of Marsh Creek, showing up at planning commission meetings, writing letters to the city, inviting the developers to come in to the Friends of Marsh Creek reading and talk about how it's important to locate new parks adjacent to Marsh Creek and to plant native vegetation in their city parks. So after all these years of working with the developers, then we've created that extra space that's needed to widen the creek. So I'm going to be talking, the next few slides are going to be taken down at Sun Gold Park. And just wanted to really show, this is one of the more challenging aspects of the park. A home owner association owned this pretty ugly detention basin. This was like the old school water quality detention basins, and it was surrounded by a fence. The homeowners called it the ball catcher. It didn't really serve any like public amenity to their development. And the Contra Costa County Flood Control District purchased this property in order to expand the channel as wide as possible to make room for both floodwaters and trees. And this was in May 2020. If you can go to the next slide, please. Now we are looking also, this is right before construction. We're standing at the furthest downstream edge on the pedestrian bridge looking upstream, and the water quality basin with that big fence is on the right-hand side right there. And then on the left-hand side, you can see those new houses. These houses, we worked closely with the developer to convince them to face the houses toward the creek and to not build any fences between the houses. And these people just come straight out of their front yard. Maybe they'll play basketball in the park and then walk right onto Marsh Creek. It's really awesome to see the interaction of these homeowners with the creek. All right, so this is before, and if you can go to the next slide. So this is the excavation and the widening of the channel that took place beginning in May of 2020 all the way through about December. And then next slide. And this is the riparian restoration project. So this was September 2022. We just did the third and final round of planting in March of 2023. So, and you go to the next slide, please. And then lastly, I just want to emphasize the importance of having a little bit of nature in this very urbanized area. These are community residents who came out and planted some trees as part of the Three Creeks project. These are some students monitoring water quality. Earth Team goes out once a month and monitors water quality with their students. And they now have a program at Liberty High in Brentwood. And then the picture up here is my favorite. It was drawn by a 4th grade girl who goes to the creek every day. And this is just the potential to see what a little person who has access to nature in their backyard can experience with just a little bit of a few more trees and fish and wildlife in their backyard. All right, now I would like to introduce Ben Weise, the Agriculture Conservation Manager at the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. Ben has worked at the RCD for over 6 years and we'll be talking about the larger creek restoration at Marsh Creek State Park.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Weise. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm the Ag Conservation Manager here. Normally not too involved in the watershed world, but watersheds contain agriculture and restoration, so I'll be there too. I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about some of the projects we've got going on over at the Marsh Creek State Historic Park. You can see there right in the middle of the John Marsh house. The creek kind of is a little beyond that. I don't know if you can see in this picture, but we'll get into that. If you want to go to the next slide for me, Victoria. Right, so this project initially started through a riparian corridors restoration grant through the Department of Conservation. Under that grant program, the Department of Conservation funds planning and implementation of riparian restoration as long as it serves some adjacent agricultural benefit, which, that makes a lot of sense given Marsh Creek and the history of agriculture. You can see in the photo here, kind of some agricultural fields there over on the eastern side of the creek. But more or less, as we looked around for opportunities where we could use this grant, this site at the Marsh Historic State Park came up. And in talking with state parks, we kind of landed on these 3 focus areas. So you can see basically the white, red, blue, and yellow lines are the extent of the Marsh Creek from the start of the reservoir or right where it outlets there. That white line is actually flood control district property. But then the red, blue, and yellow lines are, for the most part, state parks property. So in conversation with state parks and then with also the restoration design group, we started to look around at this creek and found that the yellow line, for the most part, was pretty healthy, just needed some weed management in there. But for the most part, is pretty shaded, pretty vegetated, not a lot of work there. The blue line, going a little upstream, was more or less the just in need of vegetation. There's not much earthwork that needs to be done there. And then the red line being some of the areas that need some of the most help. There's a lot of significant erosion happening there that State Parks was interested in trying to reverse, and we were interested in keeping out of the creek so that the entire stretch of creek from here to Dutch Slough remains healthy. And then the last part, as I mentioned, the white line is the flood control district portion of this project, which were actually funded through a different grant through the Wildlife Conservation Board, but will more or less cover the same stuff. Some minor erosion work and some replanting. So from now, if you want to go to the next slide, Victoria, we'll show you some of the extents along the creek here. So the green arrows are the arrows you see all throughout this project are roughly where the project or where the photo location was taken. So you can see in the bottom photo there, that's standing from up on top of the reservoir looking down. You can start to see a little bit of some vegetation there. The creek is good, but then the left photo, you can see some of the erosion that we're hoping to control. If you go to the next slide, this is along the red portion of the creek. You can see some pretty heavy and significant erosion. We wanted to address that with state parks. And then in the bottom photo, you can actually see the historic dam that State Parks just finished renovating this past fall, I believe. So there is other work even going along the project as well. We'll go to the next slide. And this is kind of the I guess, middle stretch of the creek. You can see not too much erosion. There is a little bit in there, but for the most part, just needs some vegetation. We'll go to the next slide. So this is kind of the final stretch here. This is right at the beginning there near the Los Medanos Community College. For the most part, pretty well vegetated, but there is some weeds in there. The bottom left picture, for those of you that aren't familiar, is Tree of Heaven, pretty nasty invasive weed. There's a good stand of it along this creek that we're hoping to tackle with this. So that kind of covers, I believe, more or less the impetus of our project, what we're trying to accomplish in restoring. I think it works out to about a mile of creek, basically from the end of the reservoir down to where the state park's property ends. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And if I remember correctly, yeah, so this is kind of where we're at timeline wise. We're, kind of in the middle right now between our planning grant, and which will get us at least to 65% project design on the state parks portion, but then simultaneously, we're also going to get to 65% on the flood control district portion of the project, basically have permits submitted. But now we're in the middle of trying to find the rest of the implementation funding. We actually have a small portion already locked up through the Wildlife Conservation Board grant that's covering planning and implementation, but just along the flood control district portion of the grant. So yeah, that's where we're at, mostly just grant writing. I mentioned RDG, Rich Wakeling, who many of you are familiar with, I'm sure. I think I've seen the logo on a couple of other people's slides, but we're working with them right now to design those plans. Right now, we're just in the very early existing conditions analysis, going out, seeing what plants are there, what water flow looks like, taking borings, all sorts of fun stuff like that. So we should have some more updates for you in the future, but here's kind of just a rough timeline. I may be a little bit optimistic, thinking we can get to construction in 2025, but fingers crossed we'll get there. With that, that wraps up my portion of this project. Next, I wanted to introduce Venesa Kremer. Venesa works for the Wilton Rancheria in the Cultural Resources Department. She's been working in the watershed for the last 3 years or so and is mostly here to educate, identify, protect, and preserve tribal cultural resources. With that, Venesa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yeah, I'm just here to talk a little bit about the Wilton Rancheria, and in particular the people that used to live in the area of Marsh Creek for thousands of years. So there was multiple tribes, but the Wilton Rancheria is a federally recognized tribe, and they are a sovereign nation, which for those of you that don't know, it basically just means that they are a nation within our nation. Proof of their existence of these ancient people can still be found today. And the middle picture is a bedrock mortar that is actually located near the Marsh Creek Dam. And so I work partially in the field and I work partially in the office. So the Wilton is a growing community, but right now we only have 2 full-time monitors, and then we have 2 full-time in-office people, and I float between the office and working outside. And so as a tribal monitor, our goal is to preserve, identify, and protect tribal cultural resources. We work in tandem with biologists, archaeologists, construction crews, engineers, and we go out onto actual project sites and do all kinds of different things. We do field surveys, we do active construction monitoring, we will follow wildfires. We work everywhere. So particularly in the valley, but we go all the way to the mountains and then all the way down to the ocean. And let's see, what else was I going to say? Besides protecting the resources that are here, we just want you guys to know that we're also here for your protection. There are federal laws that prohibit the tampering with or moving or destruction of any of these cultural resources. So anytime that you're out and you see a tribal monitor, just know that we're out there because we know that there is something that has either previously been recorded or that we have tribal knowledge that is still inside of the ground. And so you can call us if you find any of these items, and you can also call any of your local tribes that are around, and they should be able to help you get these items back to their proper owners or back into the ground. And if you call the Wilton Rancheria, you can ask for the cultural department, and we'll be happy to get you guys back up to speed and where those need to go. A lot of our work in the watershed right now is primarily around the Marsh Creek area. We have several projects coming up. I saw the one that was in Oakley where they're trying to develop along that creek there, and we will be involved in that. We have been working with state parks all up and along the dam restoration, and then beyond it. We're also working with Save Mount Diablo and hope to get back to their house and get up into some of their sites up inside of there. And I know that they're trying to make it so that the native people will be able to plant and then harvest from some of the areas where we basically have lost permissions to go. And so anytime we're working in these areas, and it's an opportunity for us to kind of gain some of this territory, but also some of this knowledge. And so, yeah, we just thank you guys for allowing us to be here and for sharing some of this. And on the left-hand side, the picture there, that's fire affected rock. There are items, like I said, literally laying everywhere. And so I just kind of brought a couple of photos for you. And the next time I hope to have a better slide. I had one made, but I didn't get a chance to run it through my leadership. And so I didn't want to share anything that they would make feel uncomfortable with. So then on the right is an arrowhead, and this one is very old. And this one was found in the city of Brentwood. And yeah, that's pretty much all of it. And just thank you guys.
So that concludes our presentation, and this slide just is a reminder of some upcoming events in the watershed, the Dutch Slough Day, like John mentioned, and then the Friends of Marsh Creek Watershed are going to be launching a speaker and service learning series in June. So more information on that will be posted on their website and sent out on their email lists soon. So now it's just time for question and answer. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and anyone who has questions, the group can answer it.
Thank you all so much. I knew there was a lot going on in this watershed, but I am absolutely blown away by how much is going on, how much has happened, how much work has been done, how many people have been involved, the partnerships between the municipalities, the nonprofits, the community groups. It's just inspiring. Thank you so much also for the incredible maps and photos that you showed. They really make it come alive, particularly those amazing aerial or drone photos. Really give you a sense of that tidally influenced area up by Dutch Slough. And it's just, I don't know, I found myself getting emotional. So thank you all so much for your work. And I would like to echo Victoria that we can open it up to questions and discussion. I also do want to take a moment to allow some folks who joined us a little bit late today to introduce themselves or give updates if they would like to. But let's start just by taking some questions and reactions to our presentation today. And just thank you again so much to our presenters. John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Venesa for being here on behalf of the Wilton Rancheria. And my question for Venesa is, was Rancheria involved as being a monitor on the Three Creeks project?
We have not been approached about the Three Creeks project yet. If that is something that is still going to be worked on in the future, we'd love to be involved. But usually I have to wait until those forms come across my desk, unfortunately, or somebody is kind enough to reach out. And yeah, so if that's something that you'd like us to be involved in, please get a hold of me afterwards. And yeah, we'll connect that way. And
Right.
one I wanted to mention though was I forgot to mention the large amount of human remains that happen to be in the ground all along this watershed. And so that is another big reason why we're there. And so yes, any opportunity that we get to just help out with that, we're willing. So.
Well, I think that was the goal on the Three Creeks project. I thought we had budgeted for a cultural resources monitor. And for those of you who don't really fully understand what Vanessa is talking about, is during construction, having a cultural resources monitor on site is a great way to be respectful of any cultural artifacts or remains that might be uncovered in the excavation process.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Vanessa, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Is it calling and asking for the cultural resources or cultural department, or email?
Yeah, you can email me directly. It's vkramer at wiltonrancheria-nsn.gov. And I can put that in the chat box for anyone who would like to get a hold of me, and we can have a future conversation. But yes, you can definitely call the Wilton Rancheria and just ask directly for myself or the cultural department.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That's it's considering that you have not a whole lot of staff, that's a very generous offer. So thank you. Ave.
Sorry. I want to say thank you to everybody. It's so inspiring to hear these stories. And I wish, like the network news and Twitter and all, I wish these stories would get out. I just feel like people would be in such a better place. You know, it's such a better way to start, a great way to start the day. But anyway, my question is maybe for John, but really for anyone. The Walnut Creek Watershed Council is interested in pursuing a watershed restoration plan for the Walnut Creek watershed. And one of the things I wondered was, how did you narrow down your goal, you know, to shade? How did you get your goals narrowed down and still, you know, take everyone into consideration? And on that note, kind of part of it was for the Brentwood survey, did you just send out letters to the folks on either side of the creek without a lot of education or preamble, I guess?
Yes, I mean, anyone can answer that. I don't know, maybe it's for John or Sarah, but yeah.
So with regards to the cultural monitoring?
Or I mean,
oh no, Claudia, you weren't, I don't know if you were on in the beginning.
I hopped on late, so
okay, yeah, they were just talking about for the Marsh Creek restoration plan. They've got a mission and their goals and their mission statement, and they were able to narrow it down, and that is important. And I wonder how they did that. And they also reached out to the community of Brentwood, noticing the folks on either side of the creek, and these people just said what they wanted, what they would like to see. And I just wondered, God, did you just send it kind of blind? That was it.
I think with in Brentwood, it was very like the map that John showed, where all the available land, it was really based around the available land that was adjacent to Marsh Creek. And one of the reasons I think that we've been able to have such success in Brentwood and Oakley and Three Creeks is because the watershed was developing over the last 20 years. You know, it's different in Walnut Creek. It's, you know, so much has already been developed. And there was large parcels of land, agricultural, you know, dairies at Dutch Slough, city parks that hadn't been built. So the motivation popped up when a developer would come say, I want to develop this large stretch of land. And that was the opportunity that that the Friends of Marsh Creek would engage and show up at city council meetings and work with the developer to try to improve the section of creek one development at a time.
yeah, I think also, thank you. I think Ave was also referring to the bar graphs that I think John showed with the survey responses from, I think it was from Brentwood residents. That in terms of that survey, could you maybe talk a little bit more about that, how that was done, or, yeah, that is exactly what I'm referring
So,
to.
again, there is this report called the past and present condition of the Marsh Creek watershed that you can find on the internet. The survey was a graduate student's idea, and you run into people that are helpful. And we had a parks manager at the city of Brentwood said, I have an extra $5,000. Let's just send it out to everyone within a quarter mile of the creek. The survey was well designed. I bet you Sarah Puckett still has a copy of it in her files because she's way more organized than me. And I bet you it could just be recycled and sent out to people who live along Walnut Creek, and you would learn something. It's pretty open-ended questions. And there were a lot of interesting responses. But when we first I could say a lot about this. Let me just step back and think. I've talked to Bob Simmons about the planning process, and I've been involved. I'm going to have a graduate degree in environmental planning, and been involved in a lot of plans. And I love this quote from President Eisenhower, or General Eisenhower, because he made it as a general. Plans are nothing, planning is everything. And I just would encourage the Walnut Creek Watershed group to not get stuck on developing the definitive plan. Come up with some kind of overarching vision and plan for the watershed. Don't get too stuck on the details of it. And very quickly start finding places on the ground that are meaningful where you can implement some elements of the plan. And the vision that when I went to Marsh Creek Watershed, I just finished graduate school with Matt Condolf at UC Berkeley, and we learned about flood control channels and how they're called, they're trapezoidal channels, and the way to change them is to create a two-stage channel. And that was the graphic that Sarah Puckett showed you. And I went around for a decade telling people about two-stage channels. Nobody except the engineers had any idea what I was talking about. The basic thing I'm talking about is you got to give the creek more room so that they better protect us from floods and allow nature a place along the creek.
Okay, thank you so much. And you cut out just for a second. Planning is nothing. What is everything?
Plans are nothing. Planning is everything.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we folks who are involved in that Walnut Creek effort will probably want to talk more with John, and I know Sarah's involved in that as well. So thank you all. So Igor.
First of all, I wanted to express my appreciation for this presentation. It was exceptionally well done and deserves a lot of airtime. We need to find a way to use this vehicle to spread the word. Congratulations to all of you who put it together. The graphics, the way you put the context out there and showed us the concrete's not a good word, the specific aspects of what was going on and the way it was all woven together, highly appreciate that. And like I say, I think maybe if, at the very least, this ought to be a big feature of the symposium that's coming up. It'd be a good place.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that offline and discuss. But I think you're absolutely right that we do not want to give this short shrift, and
this needs needs airtime. It's really
I think of this as almost a preview of what we can potentially do, and I'm happy to think about working with these folks about how to get the word out. So thank you.
Sorry, but the other part that I just wanted to mention is that I'd really like to be better educated on Venesa's subject. It's
Yes.
something that I feel in my heart that is very important to do. And at the same time, I don't really know how to go about dealing with this. issue and these artifacts or remains or whatever else that we might be disturbing or uncovering or whatever. We want to be respectful and honor the people whom they represent. And I think at some point, maybe something a little more fleshed out on the subject of that nature would be very, very helpful. Because I think, again, this needs more airtime. I think it needs dealing with and honoring the Native American heritage. I think is a very healthy thing to do for all, even for, especially I think, for those of us who are not Native American and know how to behave properly. So that might be something to do in the future, perhaps, to expand on that topic. Anyway,
Yes,
congratulations again. This is a gem. I really enjoyed this presentation.
Thanks, Igor. And I totally agree with you on the wanting to delve deeper into some of what Venesa mentioned. And it is hard, as she acknowledged in the chat, the fact that, you know, this place that we are lucky to live in and work in was home to and is home to a diverse range of peoples. And so it is hard to try to represent, right, all of the different elements of that. And, you know, I think we can also take that conversation forward and potentially explore some of that more in this forum. So thank you for bringing that up. We have a question from someone calling in from a phone number ending in 5527. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Stephen Getz. My desktop doesn't have a microphone or camera, so I called in as well. And I'm with the Native Plant Society in Solano County, and we learn a lot watching some of these Watershed Forum presentations. And I have a couple of questions for the creek restoration folks. I'm wondering, how do you source your plant materials for the restoration? I don't know if you've covered, I apologize if you covered this earlier, but do you work with nurseries to get plant material from the watershed, or do you go out to commercial nurseries? I also have a question on maintenance, weed maintenance and watering during the dry season. Is that something you think you need to do, or do you have to do it? And maybe the shade from the trees eventually will take care of the weeds, but until you get to that point, you know, is that a manageable problem? And finally, are predators a problem? You know, like bulls and deer and beavers, and how do you deal with that?
So I mean, I can address this broadly and how the RCD approaches these issues, but I think if Sarah, if you want to give some specific examples, or John, or you know, to start that way, maybe it might be nice.
Sure, I can.
Why don't you start, Sarah?
Oh, just on Three Creeks, we worked closely. Barry with Friends of Marsh Creek went out and collected seed in the watershed with the watershed nursery, and they grew as many plants as possible from seed. And then if not, the landscape contractor, which is Triangle Properties, went out and tried to find as many locally sourced plants as possible.
I will add that one of the strategies at Three Creeks was to plant the plants in clusters, pretty densely planted in clusters, to avoid excessive mortality from herbivory. The idea would be if there were so many of them close together, you wouldn't, you know, something would survive. And Sarah can talk more about how successful that was in this context. River Partners does this all around the Central Valley, and the lack of native seed, and more importantly, the lack of geographically and genetically appropriate native seed, that would be what we call zero generation or low generation native seed that that is well, what happens is when you grow native seed in a farm field to propagate seed year after year, it starts to lose its genetic diversity. And so it's important to have the seed material as close to the collection site integrity as possible. So River Partners has started a new venture called Heritage Growers, and we now have 150 acres under native seed production in Colusa County, and I encourage you all to Google that, Heritage Growers. It's a really exciting operation, and we've gone out on a limb to make this happen, and we really need everyone to buy seed from us.
Awesome. Thank you, John. That's great. And I was going to mention Great Valley Seed is another similar effort where they're trying to amplify local genotypes. And so, yes, we do a combination of our own seed sourcing whenever we have seed collection permits. So responsible seed collection is very important. And then having the clean facilities to grow these plants out is super important. Sarah mentioned the Watershed nursery, and they are what I consider the gold standard of nursery practices. Their plants are very clean in terms of they do a lot of testing for phytophthora and other harmful pathogens that could be introduced unnecessarily into restoration projects, and they just really do a great job of not doing that. So that is some of the examples of where we're getting stuff. Sometimes there are also other programs like through the Xerces Society or through Pheasants Forever, Quails Forever, where they have seed programs where they are amplifying local sources of seed. And they grow out those and then share those with other people, whether they're awarding them or making them available to restoration entities at low cost. So those are some of the examples of places where we're sourcing the seed from. And then your question about herbivory, as John spoke to that, but I will also mention that a lot of when we're planting appropriate native plants in these areas, yes, there will be some mortality. Yes, there will be some herbivory, but the plants have evolved to, most of the plants have evolved to be able to deal with that to a certain degree. A lot of our native plants have very deep tap roots, and even if a lot of the vegetation is eaten, there will still be survival of a lot of those native plants. So I hope that answers some of your questions. And yeah, Sarah, please.
You asked about irrigation too. Yes, extremely dry out in Marsh Creek. We had installed a mainline irrigation line along the entire length of Marsh Creek and irrigated have been irrigating the whole time. And the other thing that we did was plant the planting in these patches over 3 years. So, which worked out well because it gave us a little bit more flexibility. We had a drought the first 2 years and then a massive flood the third year. So it just gives a little bit more flexibility. And we're weaning those plants off, or the landscape contractor has been weaning the plants off of irrigation slowly, so that eventually they won't have any irrigation. And then lastly, beavers have been an issue. We've learned a few things. We didn't realize that they were going to come in so quickly, which was exciting, that we created this habitat and they showed up, and then they started eating all the cottonwood trees. And something that we learned is probably not planting the cottonwood trees along the Marsh Creek Trail, because they provided a hazard and they were falling on the trail. So maybe planting more oaks and sycamores, something that they don't like as much on the trails, and then the willow or the cottonwoods kind of closer to the water.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. I think in terms of the irrigation, the larger projects like Three Creeks and Lower Walnut Creek Restoration Project absolutely need to have piped in irrigation. For the smaller projects, we'll do things like pump water from the creek into buckets and do bucket brigades, or even backpack sprayers for smaller projects. There are other options there as well. We've done water barrels on trucks. We've done all kinds of different things depending on the scale of the project. And then, yes, in terms of the herbivory, the other thing that we do is we try to strategically cage certain plants, or provide or put them in tubex or other protective structures. So that is another thing that we try to do when we can, when we have the resources. Ben, did you want to add some stuff to that, maybe about the pesticide or the some of the
I was going to talk more just about seed collection. We've worked with Solano RCD. They've got a nice little greenhouse up in one of their facilities. They're collecting seed all over the Delta for use in DWR restoration sites. I was going to mention for John here. I think we actually at Contra Costa helped collect a number of acorns and black walnuts that are currently being grown out, I think, at Heritage Growers for future use at the Dutch Slough site. I'm not totally sure, but I know that we were collecting acorns from heritage oaks around the Oakley area. I think we were trying to keep everything within 10 miles of Dutch Slough just to kind of protect that genetic diversity. We did that maybe a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So yeah, I mean, we try to keep it local.
That's great. I just want to emphasize Heritage Growers and also Great Valley Seed. One of the reasons we're actually working together, and one of the reasons it's important to support us, is because there is a monopoly in the native seed market. And so we're a native seed company, not necessarily a nursery. We contract with nurseries to grow things out like acorns. But on these big projects, we really need to amplify seed. And then there was another question about weeds and weed management. And two things I would want to say about that, at least on a lot of the projects River Partners works on, which are on former agricultural fields, trying to figure out how to get the field as clean as possible for planting, and ideally planting immediately after the field comes out of a crop, reduces the seed pressure. And then the second thing is the tool of herbicides being an absolutely essential tool. Some environmentalists think it's really a huge problem. We're doing everything we can to reduce the amount of herbicides we use, trying different trials to figure out what works. But for now, it's a tool that we simply have to have in our toolbox, or everything would be overcome by weeds.
Yeah, and some things just don't die if you just cut them down or even pull them out of the ground. There are things that you absolutely need to use herbicides in order to get them under control. So yeah, thank you so much for all of that. Did anyone have any other questions that they wanted to bring up at this time? Otherwise, I'd love to have some people who have joined us late introduce themselves if they would like to. Any questions? Okay. So just going to give folks a chance if they would like to introduce themselves if they joined late, or give an update for the forum. If you don't want to, just say so. Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Sorry I was late. Kathy Cutting, Cal State East Bay. Doing the good work out here outside. Sorry, I'm a little discombobulated from all the stuff happening today. But good to see you all. Do you have something you want me to update on, Lisa? Okay.
Nope, just wanted to give you the opportunity. Let's see, Alexander.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me okay? Yes. I joined a little late. I had some troubles. I'm remote today, and I had some troubles trying to get the audio and everything to work. But yeah, I'm representing Contra Costa County Public Works and of course Flood Control District. And I think I'll be a staple on a lot of these meetings now as I get my feet wet more into flood control after rotating from another engineering division. So yeah, again, great information. I really enjoyed the presentations, and so happy to be included.
Great, tink you. And just for clarification, you said you're an engineer?
Yes, I'm an engineer, yes.
Great, thank you. Glad you could join us.
Yeah,
Claudia, do you want to give an update or?
Sure. Claudia Gimberling, the Contra Costa County Public Works Department, Environmental Services Division. Apologies for being late. I'm sorry I missed what sounded like great presentation. I am familiar. I am City of Brentwood resident since 1998, and I was involved with the Friends of Marsh Creek Watershed group for about 10 years. I was on their board for a couple of years towards the end there before they kind of dissolved. I don't want to say dissolved completely, but I'm looking forward to seeing them get back into the swing of things. And because it was I felt like a really good group. There was a lot of activities, community involvement that I was part of for the volunteers. So yeah, that great work. It's great to see, and it's great to see that in that part of the county we've got such great natural resources. It's wonderful, and glad to hear that earlier on. Like I think Sarah pointed out, in the develop, we probably success to getting the plan and restoring various areas. It's because it was still a developing area. And it's like getting in earlier on and going to the city councils. I remember going to the city council meetings and hearing about our goals and it also takes, with these watershed groups, working with the city council or the to hear us and get their involvement, get them on board with us. That makes a big difference too. So thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. Let's see, I think Stephen already got, Stephen, did you have anything else you wanted to add or for the group, or were you good? Let's see, I think he had called in, so maybe not. Okay, so all right, so thank you all so much. I also wanted to bring people's attention to the chat. If you haven't been able to look at it, there were some other people that were able to join us but weren't able to stick around. Namely one of them, Monica Olson from the Pleasant Hill Instructional Garden, also wanted to put in the ring that she agrees that these messages should be shared with others. And so I think we should talk about other ways that can be done. And then we have some more time for questions or discussion, but I also wanted to just mention that the next forum planning committee meeting, if you're interested in trying to help us figure out which things to hear about at forum meetings, we would love to hear your input. These planning committee meetings are open to anyone who's interested. The next one will take place on Zoom on May 23rd from noon to 1. If you would like to participate and don't already receive the planning committee meeting notifications, please just shoot me an email or a chat to let me know, and I can add you to that list. And then the next full forum meeting will take place on Zoom on July 12th from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m.